Thanks, everyone. Oops. I do speak too loudly, but I forgot to turn the microphone on. So why did I make that video? Why am I here today? And the answer is just that there's, I think, an urgent need for clear, honest, sober communication and dialogue about energy. There's never been really that ideal, but the divergence from sobriety has just gotten extreme in the last 10 years. And this has ramifications across the board, not just in higher energy prices and lower energy reliability, but a lot of fear and anxiety and a lot of misunderstanding that I think is damaging for society and for people's lives. I am a career energy nerd. I love all energy technologies. I'll talk a little bit about that. But energy matters. Throughout all of human history, everywhere and always, the biggest constraint on the quality of a human life is the availability, the reliability, and the affordability of energy. You see it in the modern world, you see it in history. Think of what's going on today. Is the energy crisis in Europe, China, India. The short story there is just people believe that energy is going to do X and it doesn't. You get problems. The lack of investment in infrastructure and producing energy is making us unable to respond to a surge in demand right now. That's just wrong, and it's very destructive. Think of a modern example. When the Centennial gas pipeline went down from a cyber attack a few months ago, there were fistfights in the parking lots because people had to wait longer for gas, or maybe there wasn't going to be gas. When energy's always there, perfect, cheap, and reliable, you don't even think about it. That's what we want. But when it's not, it causes major problems. You know, that's a rich world problem of, having a fistfight about gasoline. But for billions of people today, it is a matter of life and death. Let me give a little, two modern things we don't realize. Everyone's aware of planes, trains, and automobiles. Maybe the internet and modern communications, all of those enabled because of modern energy. Two things we don't appreciate enough in the modern world is modern medicine. I'm very biased towards that. I would not have celebrated my 14th birthday party or any birthday party after that if not for oil and gas. The arrival of oil and gas that enabled the rise of a modern world, one of the awesome things, impossible without it, is modern medicine. Not just the wealth that allowed research and people to take time away from food production to study and do things, but think of all the materials. Plastics they're made out of oil and gas. They didn't exist that before. I'm type 1 diabetic, right? I take insulin several times a day out of things made out of oil and gas. The carrier fluid for most vaccines is made out of oil and gas, the basic building block of organic chemistry. We've doubled human life expectancy, doubled since the start of oil and gas, from around 30 years throughout all of human history to globally 72 years today. The other one I'll touch on briefly, and particularly in a place like Greeley, is food production. Very simply, modern food production, the cost of food is dominantly driven by the cost of energy and the quantity of food. If we took out fossil fuels just from fertilizer and pesticides, forget transportation, refrigeration, storage, and movement, just got rid of the natural gas that allows us to synthesize nitrogen in copious quantities, which was the main limiting factor on food production, and fossil fuels, both as the energy to produce and the raw materials to synthesize pesticides. If we just got rid of those two things, food production would drop 60%, right? Half of humanity are dead in a couple years. Or we've got to plow 150% more land to go from 40% back up to 100%. So historically, the impact is huge as well. The world has gone through 3 energy transitions. The first 2 were about a very specific part of energy, which is food. Food is what powers the human machine, keeps us alive, allows us to do everything. The first energy transition we don't know much about, that's the arrival of fire. Because we think it was about 1 million years ago, and the books and films from then, they've decayed or been lost in the libraries. So we don't have any evidence of that. But humans have a small digestive tract. Evolutionarily, we have big brains, not all of us, but some of us, and we have a small digestive tract. So we can't eat grains, the main food that grows naturally and that we grow through agriculture on the earth. We can't liberate the energy from them like cow and elk and all the ungulates can. We have to break down those long carbohydrate chains by cooking food. So what fire did was, before that, you had to eat, nuts, fruits, meat. There were some things that our digestive systems can digest. But like, I'm an outdoor wilderness guy. To survive out in the wilderness without bringing your own food, it's actually really hard for us. For animals, it's nothing. For us, it's hard. So the arrival of fire expanded dramatically the potential calories humans could consume and led to a growth in the human population. The second big energy transition was around 10,000 years ago, and it's the start of agriculture. It was also around food. It looks like it independently evolved 3, 4, 5, 6 places around the planet, but all in a similar time frame. And what the arrival of agriculture did was it surged by far more than a factor of 10 or 100 the amount of food we could produce. Instead of just harvesting what was there, we could use some intelligence in growing enhanced processes to produce massively more food. Because of the arrival of agriculture, we had the first ever cities, the first ever written language, modern culture, the theater, drama, everything that we have today was enabled because of agriculture, because it led to this explosion of human population and therefore specialization and improvements. But one thing that neither one of those energy transitions did was meaningfully change the lot in life of the average person. As I said a few minutes ago, human life expectancy, as far as we can tell, was about 30 years in the time of the hunter-gatherers before agriculture. Human life expectancy globally was roughly 30 years just 200 years ago. So with the arrival of agriculture, we got a cream of the crop. Think of that, aristocracy, or the chief or the king or the queen, and a small group of people that could live off the surplus fruit from people that were producing food. After the invention of agriculture, 300 years ago, 90% of humanity still worked in food production. 10%, lived a different lifestyle. They had a little bit longer life expectancies. They learned to read and write literature and do science and all that. But they were a small sliver of the population. The third energy transition is the arrival of fossil fuels. This one was completely transformative, not just for human society and human accomplishments, but for the lot in life of the average person. I mentioned trying to get my clock so I don't talk too long. With the arrival of fossil fuels, as he said, just this enormous growth in human life expectancy. I mean, would you rather have a human life expectancy of 30 years or 70? I'm very biased on that one as well. Only one of them brings me here today. The other thing is the human condition. Just 200 years ago, about 90% of the global population lived on the equivalent in today's dollars of less than $2 a day. Think of your life today if you're going to live on $2 a day. One thing is, humans then were about 6 inches shorter than humans today. That's just a few generations ago. So that's not a genetic change. That's just most everyone was in some degree of starvation and never grew to their genetic potential. The arrival of fossil fuels led to an explosion of food production, the start of the Industrial Revolution, and again, all these things we know of. The one thing, before I move on, that third energy transition is far, far from done. A third of humanity, 2.5 billion people, cook their daily meal today, burning mostly wood, dung, agricultural waste, and some of them coal, solid biofuels in open stoves inside a hut. I've traveled to 55 countries. My fascination has been, how the hell did the modern world come about? And what was life like before? Why was I so damn lucky? That is a lifelong passion for me. But when you go to these places, there's just always smoke inside those huts. And again, that kills 2 to 3 million people a year. It also means you have a dramatically different life. You don't come home when it's dark and flip the light switch on. You don't plug in your cell phone. You don't have an alarm clock. And in these traditional, and again, this is not a small segment that you got to travel far into the forest to see. This is 2.5 billion people. This is 50% of the population of India, 80% of the population of Africa. The other implication of that is women in traditional societies do all the physical labor. Man, there's a lot of bad things to say about my sex. And when you go to traditional societies, you feel even worse. But in traditional societies, women spend over an hour a day, on average, over an hour a day, collecting fuel wood to burn. About an hour a day in search of water, the cleanest water they can find. But it's surface waters and there's people around there and they aren't perfectly clean. That lack of access to perfectly clean water also kills millions of people a year. So the transition fuel is propane. Think of our camping stoves or liquid petroleum gas. When there's 6 companies in Tanzania out distributing stoves and selling these propane canisters. You get over 2 hours a day for women in every household. You get rid of the smoke. You have clean cooking fuel. You can power a pump and drink groundwater. It is absolutely the most transformative change in the rise out of poverty. Now, we don't think about this stuff. We don't hear about this stuff. Only about 1 billion of the 7.5 billion people in the world live anything remotely familiar to us. But yet all the policy, all the dialogue, all the noise about the world is from this billion. No one thinks about the other 6.5 billion. The fact that 1/3 don't have clean cooking fuel to me is just an outrage, and we need to be all in to change that. It is changing. About 100 million people a year are getting liquid petroleum gas. New people getting it. That is awesome. The shale revolution in the US and right here in Weld County has made the US by far and away the world's largest exporter of liquid petroleum gases. Think propane. By far and away, that's raised global availability, driven down prices, and has been accelerating a rise out. But now we have increasing policy headwinds that are actually slowing the ability for these 2.5 billion people to get modern energy. That to me is an outrage. And why is that? How is that? Because among the wealthy, and certainly among my life, all the dialogue is about a 4th energy transition, which is to move away from fossil fuels, reduce greenhouse gas emissions. This is a very real issue. I'll talk about it. That is all the noise. That is all the energy. In fact, it was very personal to me. The mania when I was a kid was a little bit different, but it was also driven on an energy transition. We're going to run out of oil and gas and coal. We need industrial civilization is going to collapse without it. We need a crash program to get better energy. In fact, I specifically went to MIT because they had 2 devices, these tokamak reactors that look like the most promising way to fusion energy. I've been all in to replace oil and gas since I was about 16. I worked on fusion energy at MIT. I worked for years in solar energy, mostly at UC Berkeley and in a consulting job at the time. I worked for a few years on geothermal energy. I'm again working on geothermal energy. I don't care where energy comes from. That doesn't matter. What matters is the reliability, the affordability, and the amount of energy that can allow humans to live better lives. So how's that 4th energy transition going? So in the year 2000, the world got 86% of its primary energy from fossil fuels. 20 years ago, $2 trillion of subsidies and government support and 2 decades of all in, that 86% from fossil fuels has dropped all the way down to 84%. Actually, 84.3%. But we've less than a 2% move in 20 years of all in. And all the efforts that we hear about, and look, I'm in favor of this. I love new energy technologies. Almost everything we've done has been in the electricity sector in the wealthy world. Globally, electricity is 20% of global energy. If somehow we could snap of fingers and wind and solar or fusion or fission could, all the electricity, fossil fuels are gone, that's 20%. 80% of energy is building stuff, transportation, heating homes, cooking food, doing everything else. There's sort of 4 infrastructure that are key to the modern world: cement, steel, plastics, and fertilizer. These 4 things are the foundational building blocks of a modern world. All 4 of them are intimately tied, not just to the particular kind of energy you can get from fossil fuels, but the raw materials themselves in fossil fuels are in all of those products. What is steel? Oh, think of a giant wind turbine, right? That big steel tower. That steel tower is made out of iron, and 100 tons of coal is in the tower. Another 100 tons is burnt to get the 100 tons into the tower. But steel is iron plus carbon. I talked about fertilizer, cement. So what we need is just some sobriety and some realisticness about what's going on. Because the drive to change something, there's two ways to drive. One is to develop better, different, additional sources of energy. That's awesome. We should do that. Sometimes we do it the wrong way. We spend a lot of money subsidizing low energy dense technologies that only can go so far. And the net result of that has been to raise electricity prices and lower the reliability of electricity. I'm not in favor of that. I'm all in favor of bettering technologies, finding research, finding the right applications for the right things. But the other big drive that's very popular today is to tear down or hurt the other end. If we don't build a pipeline, then oil and gas will go away. If we don't allow drilling of oil and gas wells in Colorado, that'll get us off hydrocarbons. That is nuts, nuts. If you don't drill oil and gas wells in Colorado, you know how much it changes the demand for oil and gas? Zero. It just means it's produced somewhere else. It becomes more expensive. It gets produced in a dirtier fashion, more pollutants, more greenhouse gas emissions. You just displace it. Look, the classic example of this is the United Kingdom. I spoke in the House of Lords 7 or 8 years ago, imploring them to develop shale gas in England, the birthplace of the Industrial Revolution, which is not London, the Midlands of England. The Industrial Revolution began because there was cheap energy, secure property rights, and an entrepreneurial spirit. In England, they've killed all three today. But they have a shale, an awesome shale reservoir that runs right under where the Industrial Revolution was born. They could have their own low-cost, cheap gas like we have in the United States, but no, we're not going to do that. We're about fighting climate change, and we're not getting fossil fuels are unpopular. We're not going to do it. So their own gas production, which is mostly offshore, has been declining significantly. They obviously get a lot of Russian gas. They get U.S. LNG. They closed one of their natural gas storage things. Oh, we don't need it anymore. Natural gas is still by far and away their biggest source of electricity, as it is in the United States, as it is throughout Europe. But they didn't invest in this infrastructure. So what's happened now, right? Well, Russia started with a cold winter. The winds were low in the North Sea. Hydro was low in Norway and Brazil, so there's extra demand for natural gas. So now natural gas in an oil equivalent basis is $300 a barrel in the United Kingdom. They have 2 fertilizer plants in the United Kingdom. They're both shut down. They thought, we'll buy fertilizer from somewhere else. Yeah, fertilizer, food prices will go up, but we got to live with that. Well, if they don't produce the fertilizer, they don't produce CO2. CO2 you need for beer and soda and dry ice. And in fact, it's used in slaughtering animals. It's used in medical applications. Crisis. So, all right, we're going to pay the fertilizer company to make fertilizer, even though we're paying the equivalent of $300 a barrel for the gas. Propane prices through the roof. Rural people, how do they heat their homes, dry their crops? Propane. India is still dominantly coal for electricity. They're trying to build up gas, but the biggest use of natural gas in India is fertilizer, right? India's a fourth the size of the United States with 4 times the population, right? Food production is a pretty damn central activity in India. And the price of fertilizer is going through the roof in a poor country that had transformed 50% of its population to clean indoor burning propane stoves. What are millions of those people doing today? Burning coal inside their houses again. So it's not just it's politically unpopular. People are going to be pissed if gasoline's $4 or $5. It is human lives we're playing with here. This matters. Let me talk a little bit about, so why are we that's United Kingdom, that's India. Germany, they also started 20 years ago, this Energiewende, this energy revolution. They're going to get off fossil fuels. They spent $1/3 of $1 trillion in an economy a seventh the size of the US, right? That's like us spending $2.5 trillion. They had a little better record. They went from about 82.5% fossil fuel energy to 77%. So, maybe a handful of percentage points there. But what was the cost of it? What was the cost? German electricity prices, before they endeavored in this, were already 50% higher than the United States. Now they're 3 times higher in Germany than they are in the United States. Their industry would leave, but instead they subsidize and they sell electricity cheaper to businesses, so they'll still manufacture some stuff in Germany. But for low-income people, their home heating prices, their utility bills, their electric bills, they've made the lower-income people in Germany poor. California has been the champion and the leader in the United States in this respect. I lived 19 years in California. Silicon Valley, aerospace industry, most gorgeous and valuable real estate in this country. Incredibly wealthy state, the land of opportunity. California today has the highest adjusted poverty rate of any state in the nation by a fair margin and growing. Why? Because they're making energy more expensive and less reliable. It's not just you're paying your utility bills or filling your gas tank is more expensive in California. Those are huge impacts on blue-collar and low-income people. But blue-collar, mid- and low-income people work in energy-intensive industries, manufacturing, farming, transportation, trucking. Those jobs have all left California. They've left California, which is also why they have a huge welfare population. You've either got to leave California in search of a job, or you live a poor, low-income life there. And I guess it makes the people, I lived outside of San Francisco, and those people all feel hip and nifty and neat. And while they've gotten to 24% of their electricity from renewables, just to 24%, that's led to this surge in cost of electricity in California. California also imports 30% of its electricity. Right? If you don't produce it there, it just comes from somewhere else, right? And then they don't invest in their infrastructure, in their electricity grid, right? Because they're using the money from utilities in other ways to build renewables because it feels good. I like renewables. There's a place, there's a way to do it, but at all costs is not the right way. That huge campfire that was brutal in California, that fire got started because a 98-year-old piece of switching gear, had a tree fall on it. You can't have, if you have utility infrastructure near trees, that's incredibly important. You shouldn't have something 98 years old still there and not clear away, from utility lines. California's fires are started by bad infrastructure in California. So why is everyone doing this? The reason is climate change, right? I've been speaking on climate change for coming up on 20 years. It is very real. It is global. It's a thing we should keep our eyes on. We should invest. It's driving innovation. It's driving technologies. We've increased the CO2, carbon dioxide in the atmosphere by about 50% from burning hydrocarbons. We've grown methane in the atmosphere meaningfully as well. The planet's warmed about 1 degree in the last 120 years. And if you look at the satellite temperature data, not the temperature data corrupted by surface influences, we're rising by maybe 1/7 of a degree a decade. So by the end of this century, we should get to, well, if we stay at the current rate, and it could be slower, it could be faster, at that current rate, we'd get to maybe 2 degrees C from pre-industrial times warning at the end of this century. And the economics that the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change does, what's the impact of that on the world? Now, of course, that's an incredibly hard problem. We don't know is the honest answer, but there's all sorts of economists, climate economists that work on it. William Nordhaus, our first and so far only Nobel Prize winning climate economist, does analysis of this. Their estimate of what's the reduction in per capita income from 2 degrees warming is a very wide band, as you'd understand, somewhere between 0.2% and 2%. 3 generations from now at the end of the century, right? Is that worth impoverishing billions of people today, needlessly leading to premature deaths of millions? Now, what if the upper bound of the IPCC's estimate of warming with a doubling of atmospheric CO2, which again, we're on trend to hit somewhere a little before the end of this century, the upper bound is 4 degrees C. Now, it could be more than that. We don't know. They've got a range. But at 4 degrees C, their estimate is the economic impact, the reduction in per capita income, is around 3 or 4%. That's like a bad recession between now and the end of the century. It's real, but it's built on greenhouse gases rising because economic growth is going to continue. So in their models, people at the end of this century are about 300% wealthier than today. But if we get to 4 degrees C warming and we get the economic impacts they estimate, 4% of 300% is 12%. So we're only 288% richer than we are today instead of 300%. So they're real, like 8% or 4% of a hundreds of trillions of dollar economy is massive money. It's not to be ignored. It's not to be not cared about. It's just to have a proper context. This is a slow-moving technological challenge that to solve it, and we will, of course. The world has been decarbonizing for 200 years. Coal has lower carbon emissions than wood, oil lower than coal, natural gas lower than oil, nuclear lowest of all. I love nuclear power. I love all energy sources that can provide competitive, reliable fuel in their niches for people. I have no doubt we will be decarbonized in 100 to 200 years from now. But is that going to happen in 30 years? There's just no chance. In the last 20 years, we've gone from 86 to 84. Does anybody believe we're going to go from 84 to 0 in 30 years? Like the estimates from the international energy agencies, maybe we're going to get to 70s, right? It's going to be high 70s or low 70s. So like we should push ahead. But if you push ahead at all cost, you end out harming people's lives, shrinking their opportunities, and most of all, you end out harming those least fortunate than us. Everybody in this room, if your utility bills went up 50%, you'd be bummed, but it isn't going to change your lifestyle. That's not true for everyone. But I'd love to end it there, right on time, 12 o'clock. I'm never on time. And the reason my time is till 12:10. But look, I'm going to say a lot of things that some people are going to like or hate or disagree with. So I'm going to have 10 minutes for Q&A. I want to hear any questions or comments, because my goal, again, is not to push one agenda or another. It's just to have an energy dialogue that's honest, that's sober, that looks at numbers. Humans are not dominantly rational. We're emotional beings. But when we're going to make decisions that impact people's lives, we've got to look at math and numbers and have decisions that make sense.
I have the microphone.
Yes.
For anyone who wants it.
Great. First one's always the hardest.
You know, not my show. Chris, trust me, if Well County were a church, we ask you to be our pastor. Thank you for that said, remember, we see that regulatory force that is building under the Gold Dome in Denver. How do we speak practicality into that force? How do we not come off as, I'm not a climate change denier, I'm with you. I believe that climate change is real. But at the same time, I also believe that the economic forces that you have detailed are very real as well. How do we find a middle?
So, look, I've spent 30 years, I guess, failing to do that. But my belief is that at the end of the day, although humans are emotional and we must communicate with them in ways that make sense. And I think when people, like when I speak at universities, when people understand, and I show pictures of people in low income in rural Africa or India or the Caribbean, I think I see dramatic changes in university students or people knowing this. And so we wrote this report, Bettering Human Lives. It's in your bag. And it was my best attempt. I apologize, 85 pages long, but it's full of graphs and pictures. It's half a picture book. And only about 40 pages of it, a lot of it's on our company, that probably is not of interest to most people, but there's a chapter in there on where the world gets energy and how that's changed with time. We recount in detail energy poverty. There's a section on climate change. So I get asked from people, well, you believe in climate change? I'm like, I give these hour-long talks on it. There's a whole section in this book with 13 graphs explaining climate change. So of course, there's no belief in a physical phenomenon. It's understanding, we don't know the future. but we know the past. Let's understand what's happened so far. Let's have discussions about possible future scenarios, and then let's evaluate trade-offs. What's missing from the climate dialogue is any evaluation of a trade-off. Like William Nordhaus, this guy, Nobel Prize winning economist, he studied the Paris Treaty and concluded it would cost $125 trillion to achieve the Paris Treaty and maybe get 25 to 50 million of benefits. So it's like a $75 or $100 million impoverishment of the world, the Paris Treaty. And the Wall Street Journal was shocked in our ESG report that I didn't endorse the Paris Treaty. I'm like, the economists from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change say it's a massive loser for humanity. I think you should be shocked that almost everyone says they're for Paris, but don't dig into why. What's the trade-offs? What's the value? So to me, it's necessary to just have that honest. I testified in Colorado when they passed the climate change bill 2 or 3 years ago. Nobody asked a single question in the Senate. Nobody even listened. I recounted, like, what's the range of cost to achieve these goals? I don't know, but they're going to be measured in this amount. And what's the impact? If Colorado achieved its aggressive climate goals, it would change the temperature of the planet by less than 1/1000th of a degree, right? So when you do a cost benefit, you can say something about the cost. You got to talk about the benefits. They have to be at least of order the same. And of course, we have awesome investments in getting clean energy, in getting clean water, and getting modern medical care, where we can invest $1 and get $10 of benefits. There are massive human struggles today, but blindly investing all money and energy on climate change is just truly destructive for human well-being. One other fact, because the IPCC climate models, you can run them, you can gather them. If we achieved our very aggressive nationwide decarbonization plans, 50% reduction in greenhouse gases by 2030, 100% by 2050. Again, the odds of this are so vanishingly close to zero, you could round it to zero. But if we did that, and you run in the climate model, it is a 7/100ths of a degree cooler Earth, which is way below our threshold to measure it. So look, the future of greenhouse gases in the world is in the developing world. There's the people that are burning wood, or dung. The technologies they graduate, where they're going. U.S. greenhouse gas emissions on a per person basis last year, lower than any year since I was born. Ours are going down. Oh, they could go down faster or slower, but they are going down by economic forces, not by driving up energy more expensively. So better energy technology, modern energy in the rest of the world, and getting to something that 100 years from now will be as cheap, as storable, as dispatchable of oil and gas, that is game-changing. Let's invest in that. Let's passionately go after that. But just declaring something a crisis, and therefore it's a license to do anything, is not good policy. It's not good humanity. That was a long answer.
You still have time for one more.
Yeah, there's 5 minutes. I see an arm back there. Great.
As I make my way over there, I can relate to your statement about testifying in the Senate and nobody listened. As a former state senator in North Dakota, I've had that very same experience.
I testified in the U.S. House Climate Crisis Committee, and the only question I got was, were there toxic chemicals in frac fluid? I talked about climate change, about energy, about impacts, economics, energy poverty. That's the only question I got.
Phil McCready, the Economic Development Manager for the City of Greeley. And so my question is about Greeley and Weld County as an innovation hub for developing some of these technologies that really can be transformative to the energy portfolio going forward. So I wonder if you could reflect on some of the things that we might be doing in our work that help to accelerate the conditions for that rate of innovation.
Fantastic, great question. And then look, I was probably too big picture, didn't talk. Locally, right here, we're in the heart of the DJ Basin, right? This is the cleanest, the more advanced, the best shale produced oil and gas in the world, right here. So the innovations to do it better than they do it in Texas or in Pennsylvania or whatever, that was driven in Colorado, mostly by Coloradans. So at UNC, at CSU, at our universities here, and in the companies that are here, these have been awesome pioneers and drivers of making technology better. There is no better place than right here in Greeley, right here in UNC, to work on energy. Is already an energy town. As we said, #1 in Colorado oil and gas, #1 in renewable. People that are in the energy business get how energy is different than my original thing I worked in graduate school was semiconductor device physics, how to make integrated circuits smaller. Yeah, then I got into energy, thank God. But when I go to Silicon Valley, they think there's a Moore's law, and all of a sudden energy is different. With electronics, you could just keep making something smaller because there's nothing physical. It's just a 0 or a 1, you got to represent something. Energy is about mass, inertia, friction. It is a physical quantity with weight and mass. So it's not going to scale like computing power. But I think we are in a treasure trove right here of people that are surrounded by energy, that are aware of energy challenges, that can look at the math and say, where's the biggest bang for the buck? I'm going to figure out how to make cement in a different fashion. I'm going to figure out how to make steel in a different fashion. I'm going to figure out how to make small, compact, clean energy that can go into a hut in Africa and not be 10 times as expensive because they're not going to do that one, but how can we make it cheap and then scalable? I can't think of any better place than the northern front range of Colorado to do that work. So I love your comment. Yeah, and look, we've got awesome students, energy folks right here. Let's go do it. Thank you, everyone.
You know, if he's a brilliant speaker, if he only a little brighter, it'd be teasing you. Thank you, Chris Wright, so much for being our keynote speaker today. And to get over that rather awkward comment, what we want you to do is receive an award from Weld County. If I make a bad joke about somebody, we're going to give them an award. Commissioner Sain, if you would be so kind, and Chris, please accept this token of our gratitude for being such an amazing speaker today.
Come on up here. Allow me to describe the award. It does say the first annual Common Sense Leadership Award to Chris Wright. Yep. Please accept this award.
That's an honor. That's an honor. And look, again, that's my goal. I'm not an advocacy for this or that. If we can bring common sense, passion, and numbers to the energy dialogue, we can make the world a better place. And I'm comfortable and confident that the people in this room are going to play a role in that. So thank you for this award I'm very proud of.
Thank you.